Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. There's a provincial Liberal leadership race afoot in British Columbia. Recall that 1 year ago, BC's minority NDP-led government called an election and managed to secure majority government. With that result, the then BC Liberal leader, Andrew Wilkinson, resigned as leader of the party, thereby triggering a leadership contest to replace him. Only the party membership can elect its leader, and people have until December 29th to become members in order to be eligible to vote in the leadership, taking place between February 3rd and February 5th, 2022. So just how many candidates are vying to be the leader? While the deadline for nominations is November 30, so far the field is pretty full with 6 candidates. And that is excluding the recently rejected application of candidate Aaron Gunn, which has caused some members of the BC Liberal Party to cry foul. Why was a small body of unelected members allowed to make a decision for whom the members get to vote? Aside from the Aaron Gunn controversy, what are the main issues featuring in the leadership race? What issues resonate with the party membership? And just who are these 6 candidates? Well, joining me now to help unpack it all is Laurie Throness, former Liberal BC MLA for Chilliwack, Kent, and former Chief of Staff to 3 federal ministers, and Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Thank you both for joining me today. I look forward to diving right in. So let's do that. Laurie, I'll start with you. You know, certain parties federally are represented provincially. Some of the many typical provincial parties have the same names as federal parties. Could you give us a little background on and maybe history on the BC Liberals?
The BC Liberals are a coalition. They need to coalesce. Liberals and Conservatives federally need to coalesce in order to outweigh in numbers the NDP. And they've done that traditionally for a generation. And that now is threatened because the BC Liberal Party is going through exactly what other Conservative parties are going through across Canada. And that's the place of social conservatives within the party. So the electorate, particularly in Vancouver, is moving away from our traditional roots. Many social conservatives are traditional. So the more liberal side is actively speaking against social conservatives and even driving them out. And I think of Derek Sloan with the federal Conservatives. I think of a person I don't need to name from the Ontario Tories. And I think of myself in BC. Now, this is a big problem because Conservative parties still need social conservatives to win. On one hand, they're trying to keep them in the tent. With the other, they're pushing them out.
So are social conservative issues like front and center in this leadership then? I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more later on about what issues are featuring, but is this becoming kind of the center stage here?
It seems to be, particularly with the potentiative candidacy of Aaron Gunn, which was denied, which we'll talk about. But yeah, to me, social conservatism is the issue because social conservatives will bleed to the BC Conservative Party and divide the vote and make sure that the BC Liberals cannot form a government. And so that's a real problem for the BC Liberals. I think it's the big problem, the elephant in the room.
Okay. Kris, in your history, you're a BC resident. You've lived there for many, many, many years. In your experience, is this true? Is really the history of the foundation or the coalition, if you will, of the BC Liberal Party? Maybe you can share a little bit more insight there. But how important does social conservative play, especially given its history of the party?
That's a good question. I was born and raised here, and the BC Liberals have always been kind of a strange beast, if we can put it that way. In my own experience of observing politics, it was quite clear that after the Social Credit Party fell out of favor, a large portion of the Social Credit members moved over to what was then called the BC Liberal Party and kind of became it. And so that's why so many of our friends and neighbors across Canada are kind of scratching their heads going, what exactly are BC Liberals? That's part of their past, that's why, because they had to have a name change. They had to have a bit of a party rebranding even before the internet existed. And so that's why it's a little bit of a motley crew when it comes to BC Liberals. Now, from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation perspective, we come in this more with a fiscal agenda. We want to see lower taxes, less waste, more accountable government. And so what the party's name is, that isn't really up to us. We don't get into social issues, but we want to see what has been typically associated typically, with small c conservatism, but doesn't always happen. So we want to see smaller, more accountable government. We want to see balanced budgets. We want to see lower taxes, that sort of thing. And so that's what we're really looking for here in the BC Liberal Party leadership race, particularly things such as ICBC, which is our government forced monopoly on auto insurance. We want to see that opened up to competition.
Welcome back. We're discussing the BC Liberal leadership race, and I love political elections and contests, so this is a very exciting thing for me to discuss. And joining me to help unpack it all is former MLA for Chilliwack Kent, Laurie Throness, and Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Laurie, before we went to break, we were discussing, well, in fact, there were 7 candidates really in this race, and then one was, I guess, denied the ability to run. Aaron Gunn, he was rejected as a candidate, and not by the membership, because that vote doesn't happen until February. So what happened, and how was that allowed to happen?
Well, he's a young center-right YouTube sensation. He has 50 million YouTube views, 100,000 followers on social media, and he wants to run on what he calls a common sense platform, but he was rejected by a 7-person committee of the party that gave us the reason, the lack of reconciliation, diversity, and acceptance of all people in BC. They didn't give any other reason. That was it.
Well, and what does that actually really mean? That sounds like a lot of fluff words.
We don't know. I mean, as far as I can figure by his Twitter feed, he said that Canada is not a racist country, that we shouldn't lower the flag for months at a time, or don't burn down churches, tear down statues, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And maybe they view that as too politically charged to run as a candidate. We don't know.
So what happened to him? How is it possible? Like, did he paid his fee? He applied, the way all the other candidates applied. What is the mechanism?
There's a 7-person committee that decides these things, that vets candidates and allows them in. And they passed a phrase in the Constitution that says they can reject anyone that would be that would bring disrepute on the party. And so they feel that he would bring disrepute on the party. He's sort of a kind of a hot button divisive guy, they feel. And so they denied him the right to run.
Wow. Kris, what was the reaction on the ground and among members? Are they shocked or happy? What happened?
Well, just from a media perspective, give you an example. We were doing interviews on behalf of the CTF with Mr. Gunn because he's an independent journalist. He makes documentaries. And he was making a documentary, for example, about carbon taxes, gas taxes, why gas prices are so high. And so, of course, I spoke with him. Many of my colleagues spoke with him. And even while we were shooting the video in the Fraser Valley, 2 people, while driving past, honked on their pickup truck horns and waved and said, "Hey, Aaron, nice to see you." So that was really interesting. So he was that well known. From the CTF perspective, what we were seeing in his platform and separating personalities and those other issues, we really want to dig down on platform and issues. What we really liked hearing about was his plan to cancel the carbon tax, both of them here in British Columbia.
And you really suffer under the carbon tax in British Columbia. Like your gas prices are through the roof.
They're disgusting. So here in the Fraser Valley right now, gas prices are around $1.54 per liter for regular. When you get further into downtown Vancouver, they're well up over $1.60. And a huge portion of that are gas taxes. We have the highest gas taxes in North America. In fact, it's about 68 cents per liter in Metro Vancouver are taxes.
Wow.
The carbon taxes alone, I'll put it this way. The 2 carbon taxes that we have here in BC, the first one is 10 cents a liter. The second one is about 16 cents a liter. So you combine that, that's $20 extra every single time you're filling up your mom minivan.
Wow.
Just in the carbon taxes. And so that gets down to affordability. And that's where we were really happy to see that included in his platform. And so we're hoping no matter what happens, other candidates pick up on that and include those substantive issues in their platforms.
Now, Laurie, first of all, is there any chance that he could be readmitted into the race, or it's a done deal?
Well, I hear that he has a meeting on Saturday, and he's in Chilliwack, actually, and he's going to make some kind of an announcement. So that could be a jump to the Conservatives. Who knows? It could be a demand that they reverse their decision. Who knows what can happen in politics, right? But, as I go through the platform, I see lower taxes, smaller government, balance the budget, end vaccine passports, crime, protect free speech on campus, and end the ICBC monopoly. It's all socially conservative stuff. And it seems to me that that's the reason he's been rejected. And that About 25% of BC Liberal members throughout BC are socially conservative. And so that could really spark a backlash among members.
Well,
See.
I mean, some of those issues seem very obviously fiscally conservative issues, but if this is going to come down to, a certain, it sounds like elite group within the party wanting to eke out social conservative membership, well, that doesn't seem to end very well. You look across the board, the last couple federal conservative leaders, I know in my province of Ontario, the last couple conservative leaders have really reached where they became where they are because of the social conservative backing. So, is there actually something to merit by excluding a certain percentage of the base of the membership? I don't think so. Go ahead. We're going to cut to commercial in just a few minutes.
Okay, there's a passionate desire among the BC Liberals to win in Vancouver because that's where they lost last year.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion on the BC provincial Liberal leadership race. And once again, Laurie Throness and Kris Sims joining me. Many candidates, we still have 6 candidates, keeping, Aaron Gunn's denied candidacy aside. Michael Lee, Renee Merrifield, Ellis Ross, Kevin Falcon, Val Litwin, Gavin Dew. A lot of names here, 3 of them former MLAs, presently sitting MLAs. Kris, any of these jump off the page to you, or any of them seen as the front runner?
Not quite sure about front runners. And since Aaron Gunn has been excluded from it, it's really kind of up in the air right now. A lot of people are hesitant, I think, to make really big proclamations about their platforms. However, Ellis Ross, who's an MLA, he's been quite forward with, for example, using BC's natural resources to our own advantage. So things such as oil and gas, especially natural gas. He was a leader in his First Nation before he became a sitting MLA. And he's talked about using, for example, royalties from pipelines and from work in natural resources, and of course, collecting the very generous income taxes that are taken from those high-paying jobs and putting it to good use. So those are elements where the CTF can say, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. We're waiting, frankly, to hear from other candidates to see if they want to do things like that, including things like keeping their promise, which they did originally to opening ICBC up to competition. That was a party platform proposal that they all agreed on last time around during an annual general meeting for their policy. So those are the key things we're looking at here for us.
Laurie, she mentioned Ellis Ross as a potential, guy to watch, if you will. He's Indigenous. This is a big issue, obviously, especially considering what has gone on or what has been discovered in Canada, or our history kind of coming to the surface, if you will. How big of a deal will Indigenous issues play into this leadership?
Well, Ellis is the most conservative of all the candidates. He was chief of the Haisla First Nation in Kitimat. I visited him as chief then, and I got to know him really well as an MLA. And he is a really cool guy, very practical, plain-spoken, politically incorrect, much loved in caucus and liked in the House, even by the NDP. So he was really a breath of fresh air and probably the one most likely to garner the support of social conservatives. In fact, I have a friend who joined the party, the social conservative, in order to vote for him. Wow. So I think there's a possibility there that he might be the dark horse in the race that would be acceptable to all sides of the BC Liberals and a formidable opponent for the NDP. I would welcome that. Ellis is a good guy.
Well, I mean, that's something to consider. I mean, I've run as a leadership contestant here in Ontario. One thing you always want to do is differentiate yourself from your opposition, both the government opposition and the candidates. And sometimes, you hear about, how they cast Aaron Gunn to the side. Oh, he was too different, or, he stood up too much, or he said these things that might have been controversial. I don't know. But it's okay to be different. I mean, that's part of the beauty of a leadership race. You get to debate the ideas. You put everybody on stage, give them a microphone, and may the best man or woman win. Why is it that people are scared for different opinions?
Well, Ellis alone among the leadership candidates would have welcomed Aaron Gunn to the race. Nobody else will touch it. And so I think that speaks well of Ellis. He's not afraid of social conservatives or social conservatism or of competition in a leadership race. And so, maybe he can help to turn things around. I don't know.
Okay, what about Michael Lee, Renee Merrifield, again, sitting MLAs? Anything you want to add to that, Laurie?
Well, Michael spent most of his time in a clear conflict of interest calling for Aaron Gunn not to be approved as a candidate because of his social stand. So the committee, if they listened to him, he was able to knock out a formidable opponent before he even entered the race. So,
How could that be? How isn't that pretty obvious?
And now Michael Lee's campaign manager, there's a big Twitter storm over the weekend, says she was berated in a restaurant in a nasty way by 4 people from Falcon's team, and Christy Clark has jumped in and supported this campaign manager of Michael Lee, and Falcon has asked the party. So, it's all heating up, right?
Wow. And okay, Kevin Falcon, we've heard a lot about Kevin Falcon's name. Does he stand a chance? He was obviously the MLA for Surrey Cloverdale from 2001 to 2013. He even ran for leader once before. Does he have a shot this time around, Laurie?
Well, I think he's probably the front runner. He ran against Christy Clark in 2011 and lost, and promised to run again and didn't. This time he said he won't run again. But he has a good track record. He's responsible for the Port Mann Bridge, the Canada line of SkyTrain, which is very popular, and probably is the middle-of-the-road candidate who's the most well-known in BC and probably the front runner. I would think Ellis Ross may come in second. Okay,
Gavin Dew, an entrepreneur businessman. Val Litwin, I loved his website. He's the CEO of BC Chamber of Commerce. He's a businessman, but such energy.
Yeah, and Kris may be able to speak better to this. I've never met the man, but former CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. He wrote a book about extreme kindness.
Right.
Seems like a very credible candidate.
We've got to jump to commercial, but we'll be right back. And Kris, I'll let you jump in a few moments. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on the BC Liberal leadership race, which will be decided in February 2022. It seems like a long way off, but it's just a few months. A lot of candidates, many good candidates, some maybe not as well known as others. Before we went to break, we were talking about the CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce running. You represent the Taxpayers Federation in BC. Kris, what are your thoughts on him?
Well, we'd like to see somebody who has some understanding of what businesses have been going through in the past 2 years, especially when it comes to government regulation and taxation. And if being former head of the chamber helps that sounds great. Our issue, though, is once you get into power or once you even become leader, you have to stick to your promises and you have to stick to your principles. And so this whole idea of, staffers fighting back and forth and nitpicking and people piling on, most average, hardworking British Columbians don't care about that stuff. Around 40% of their incomes right now are going to taxes at 3 various levels of government. A lot of people can't afford to buy a house, even with 2 people professionally working in British Columbia. It's awful. And we pay the highest gasoline prices in North America, and our cost of living through natural gas because of the carbon taxes are going up. The last thing they want to hear about is infighting and political nitpicking. And so whomever gets to be leader, we hope that they make sure that they stick to these smaller government, more accountable government, low tax principles, because we need this sort of change.
So Kris, is affordability the top issue with this leadership? Obviously, it played a huge role in the federal election that we just wrapped up a few months ago. In this leadership, is that a top issue?
Oh, absolutely. It's enormous. Every person I talk to in British Columbia mentions affordability off the top of their head, especially now with what's happening federally with inflation. And keep in mind that the carbon taxes don't just hit you at the fuel pump. Most people heat their homes with natural gas.
Right.
And by the time all these carbon taxes are jacked up to $170 a ton, it's going to cost you around $900 more per year to heat your house. That's a new house with full insulation. That's just in the carbon tax. So folks have got to stick to these issues.
Laurie, what about COVID issues? What about vaccine mandates, vaccine passports? BC seemed to emerge out of the first, 3 lockdowns. I don't even know if you had a lockdown. Kids were in school. They never were pulled the first year. Kudos to BC. But they escaped COVID relatively unscathed. And then we saw sea change this summer, where now you have the passports. There are more impositions now being put on by Bonnie Henry, the Chief Medical Officer of Health there. How are BC Liberal membership, how are they reacting to this? Is anybody running on these issues?
Well, the only female candidate, Renee Merrifield, MLA for Kelowna Mission, was health critic, and she waffled on mandatory vaccinations for healthcare professionals and on mask mandates, and was severely criticized in the press for it. So there is a fairly significant segment of social conservatives who do not like mask mandates and mandatory vaccinations. And in fact, Bonnie Henry told me twice in caucus people will not be required to be vaccinated. And I pushed her on it because, I felt that would become an issue. And she said, I said it already to you, people will not be required to vaccinate. And this last weekend, they laid off 1,500 healthcare workers who are badly needed in the healthcare system because they've refused to be vaccinated. So I don't really understand that. And I think there's something of a backlash. Overshadowing this is the health of the coalition. Who can keep the coalition together? That is the big political question. It's not even a question of policy. So you need a leader who is tall enough to straddle the divide, the growing divide between conservative and liberal members of the BC Liberal Party. And I don't really see anyone today who is up to that task and who has said, I'm willing to do that. Perhaps Ellis Ross, but that's the only one I can see.
Wow. So this sounds a lot of like when Stephen Harper became the head of the Canadian Alliance and he had to keep all these different factions together. We only have 15 seconds, Laurie, but how will the party stand in 3 years' time against the NDP?
If they don't keep together as a coalition, they will fall again to the NDP. Sadly, but it's true.
So I guess maybe the NDP is watching on the sidelines, maybe popping some popcorn and seeing what happens.
They are rubbing their hands in glee over this. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, Kris, Laurie, thank you both so very much for joining me. We'll probably have you on again as we progress within this leadership race. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if you live in British Columbia, you're going to want to pay attention to this Liberal leadership race because who knows, the leader and the victor of this race could emerge as your future premier in just a few years' time. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.